Hello, and welcome back to the Camera Rolling Podcast. I'm your host, Ronnie, and today we're going to be talking about Hallmark movies. Of course, because it's December, I had to do at least one episode talking about Christmas movies, and Hallmark is kind of the place for that. But before I get into it, I want to talk about some recent watches. So the first one is VHS, and it's an anthology horror series. It's about a group of guys who go to rob a man for his VHS tapes, and while they're there, they decide to watch some of the tapes. I think anthologies are fun because, some of the stories are really great, and then other ones are, kind of, a miss. Like, the movie XX is a really great example of a horror anthology that I also like. But in VHS, I thought the first story was really good. I kind of love when, a female presenting character gets to have revenge on some pretty awful guys, because there's a lot of just awful people in these, so it feels like the comeuppance is, justified sometimes. But in the same vein, I wasn't really a fan of the story that took place in the woods. I just felt like it was too much of a deviation from the rest of the stories. Something about it was just very different from the other ones that I didn't quite like. I also watched Underwater with Kristen Stewart. It came out in 2020, and it's kind of a sci-fi thriller type of movie. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's about an underwater drilling team that has to survive when something starts to destroy their little, headquarter thing. And I liked the imagery and the characters, but it just didn't really stand out to me amongst all of the movies of people trying to survive underwater. It really didn't stand out, in my opinion. Anyway, back to our main topic, Hallmark movies, specifically Christmas movies. If you're not familiar with Hallmark, I'm going to take some time to tell you about the company as a whole and how that kind of plays into what we now know to be the Hallmark Channel filled with all of these Christmas movies. So Hallmark originated in KCMO, or Kansas City, Missouri, in the 1910s by brothers Joyce and Raleigh Hall. Also, sorry if my voice sounds weird today. I don't know what's going on, but it just kind of sounds funky. So the Hall brothers specifically wanted to make greeting cards because postcards weren't doing that well, and part of it was because of the lack of privacy that postcards have. So before greeting cards, people were sending postcards, and of course a postcard is just one card where you can see both the front and the back of the card. So if you were writing a private message to somebody, it may be seen by your mailman, or if your mom or your dad were to get the mail before you could, everyone could see your message. So having a greeting card made it more private. They also sort of popularized wrapping paper when they began making their own gift wrapping. Now, obviously, people were wrapping gifts before then, but they specifically wanted to make gift wrap. They also got the name Hallmark from, of course, their name Hall, but they also just really liked the word Hallmark as meaning premium quality, or the best, or the standard best. In the 30s, they began signing licensing agreements with the likes of Walt Disney to increase their advertising capabilities, and this is also when they started the idea of displaying cards through iVision greeting card displays, or just generally greeting card displays. The idea of Hallmark sponsoring entertainment began in 1951 when they sponsored the first original opera created for TV called Amal and the Night Visitors. When it aired on Christmas Eve, it became part of the Hallmark Hall of Fame, and many productions under their Hall of Fame have won Emmys. The brothers also helped to develop the Crown Center surrounding the headquarters in KCMO in the 60s. And around this time, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they began branching out to different markets by making keepsake ornaments, shoebox greetings, mahogany cards for African American people, which I might talk about later, and lines for Jewish and Hispanic consumers. So after Joyce Hall passed, the new president began partnering with Crayola and marketing more towards Christian consumers. So 1992 was really when the Hallmark Channel began. It actually replaced the American Christian Television System and Vision Interface Satellite Network. In 2005, they reached the highest rated ad-supported basic cable movie with Meet the Santas. While Hallmark likes to claim that it has no political alliance, it didn't shy away from it in 2008 with Hillary Clinton's town hall special that was shown on Hallmark promoting her for president. 2009 was Hallmark's first countdown to Christmas with the National Tree movie starting it off. In 2012, they also started Christmas in July. Around that time, they also started to add more seasonal events and programs so that they could keep the hype up year-round instead of just Christmas and Christmas in July. So now they have things like Fall Harvest or Summer Nights or Spring Into Love. The Hallmark Channel has also been known to be home to a lot of former stars like Candace Cameron and Jodie Sweetin from Full House. You have Lacey Chabert or Chabert, I'm not sure, and Jonathan Bennett from Mean Girls. You have Alexa Vega from Spy Kids, Emily Osment from Hannah Montana, Danica McKellar from The Wonder Years, Sarah Drew from Grey's Anatomy, and Rachel Laycock from She's All That. So in 2019, Hallmark ran into a bit of trouble when an ad featuring a lesbian couple upset some conservative moms, so they took it off air. Then, of course, they received backlash from social media, and they decided to reinstate the commercial along with working with GLAAD or GLAAD for the first time. So Hallmark has become pretty well known for its Christmas movies for so many reasons. They make countless new movies every season, all of which follow the exact same story structure. Besides having former stars at the forefront of many of the movies, they've also been known to cater to more secular but still conservative viewers in that they're family friendly and usually feature characters and families that celebrate a Christian style Christmas with nativity scenes, church attendance, prayer, and other Christian sentiments. And I bring this up because I think sometimes people forget that there's other things going on too, like during the Christmas season, and that Christmas is still rooted in Christianity, even if it's become a secular holiday with Santa being the main character. Mainly because a lot of the culture in America is surrounding this ideology to the point that people can't tell just how influenced they are, especially when it comes to things like the law. And I don't want to get too deep into it because I'm really here to talk about Hallmark as a whole, but I do think this is an important element of the channel that I felt needed to be addressed. I noticed that much of the criticism for Hallmark movies is either people being upset that their stories are too progressive, and I think we know where that's coming from, and people who are upset that the stories are just too formulaic. And I agree that the stories aren't creative or interesting, but I do think the main issue with them being progressive is that I just don't trust them to be fully supportive in that direction. In the past and in a lot of their storylines, there's this underlying ideology that I talked about earlier, but at the same time, they want us to believe they're fully behind minorities and LGBTQIA community. It's very confusing as a consumer. If you look back in some of the older Hallmark movies, you'll see more of an influence from some of those higher ups who did push more Christian narratives and to more Christian consumers. But they recently released their first film starring Jonathan Bennett, who has a same-sex partner in the movie. Before this, if there were gay characters, they weren't at the forefront of the story. Though, when I was watching An Italian Christmas, they did get pretty close. Likewise, they also have Mahogany, which is both a card line and kind of a subgenre, I guess, of the Hallmark Channel, where it just stars black people. Like, I think it's great and all that there are black people at the forefront of these movies, but I wish they would have just had black stars in the regular Hallmark movies, like, instead of, like, separating them into this own little group, if you get what I mean. Because I've seen some of the Mahogany movies, and there's nothing inherently black about most of these movies, so I don't really know why they were considered mahogany, if that makes sense. Besides, like, some better acting, in my opinion, I didn't notice a difference in storyline or theme. Their blackness really didn't make a difference. Not that they should be, like, trauma films or anything, but I just don't like the idea of them having an excuse to not write characters of color into any of their movies. So I was recently watching the Hallmark Channel, of course, and it was a movie that came out, I'm pretty sure, this year, and it was very much like the embodiment of what I have been talking about in terms of them pushing this underlying ideology, but not necessarily being, like, in your face about it. So one of their movies, of course, it was about a woman who lived in the big city, and she was trying to make it home for Christmas. And when she's in the airport, she runs into this, like, Santa-looking guy, and essentially it creates two different timelines. One where she misses her flight and has to stay behind, and the other where she gets to make it home. The movie's called A Tale of Two Christmases. As you can probably guess, when she doesn't make her flight and continues to, like, she goes back to work, and at first she's praised because everybody else went home and she's the only one who really stayed behind. She also gets to, like, meet and hang out with this guy she's been crushing on, and he seems like this super cool and successful guy. And in the other timeline, she makes it home, and a whole bunch of stuff just goes wrong. Like, she messes up her clothes, she messes up her hair, and she ends up kind of reverting back to this, like, nerdy, goody two-shoes type that she was in high school, which is kind of like what she was trying to escape in going to the city to become, like, cool and successful. And of course, in this timeline, she gets to experience her family traditions again and hang out with a guy she knew from high school that very clearly has a crush on her, etc. More or less, in the timeline where she misses her flight, she feels really sad that she's missing her family stuff, and her boss admits that he's not going to take her seriously or, like, promote her to do more work at her job, and her crush is just, like, too cool for her, and she's not as cool as she thought she was. And I think movies like this point out exactly what I mean when I say that Hallmark will make secular yet still more conservative movies when it comes to their outlook. Like, the fact that she missed her flight and it literally wasn't her fault bothers me because they act like it was her choice, like she's betrayed them to stay behind and now she must suffer the consequences of, like, these actions. It definitely walks the line of saying something more negative about city life, like that she's conceited for not coming home. And I really don't think that anyone should be made to feel bad if they don't want to come home to a family that doesn't seem to respect them. Like, when she first arrives at her parents' house, it's noticeable that they don't treat her like an adult, and it's very frustrating to her. Especially because it's frustrating when people just don't listen to you in the first place. On the plane, she gets a candy cane stuck, like, to the back of her head, and her mom decides to just cut her hair. Candy canes are not gum. They could probably be removed with, like, some soap and warm water. But instead, her mom doesn't listen to her as she's, like, struggling and being like, oh, I gotta get this out of my hair. Instead, her mom just doesn't listen to how she very clearly doesn't want to have a haircut. She has been growing her hair out, and she does it anyway. And if there's one thing I do know, some people form a real attachment to their hair. It becomes a part of their identity. So I don't take it lightly that her mom just cuts it without thinking. On the other hand, when she goes to hang out with her crush, it's clear he's a pretty successful guy, and I'm assuming they want us to see, like, how they don't really mesh well together during a particular party scene. She starts to feel like she doesn't fit in with his friends when they play charades and they can't guess what she is and they end up losing. And then she spills like this Yule log cake on one of his friends' like dress. And it feels like another moment where they're trying to create this divide between her and him and his friends, where it seems like they are like more, I don't know, adult, more like maybe even reserved and mature, whereas like she's kind of a klutz and kind of dorky, which is like fine. Like, I understood what they were trying to do, but that's not really what I gathered from those scenes. His friends actually seemed pretty accepting, like someone was going to have to lose charades, and they don't immediately get mad at her for like ruining the dress. Like the woman whose dress it falls on, she'd had a conversation with her earlier. She knew her at least in that capacity, so she was like, hey, no, it's fine. You like ruined this dress, but like I'll be fine. And there are a couple other scenes where, again, she just, like, feels this insecurity, and he continues to reassure her that, like, no, it's okay, like, you're fine. And it really just seems like a lot of her insecurity is coming from herself. And I don't want to say that she's being dramatic, that's not what I'm saying, because I understand the feeling of not fitting in, and even though no one has said anything to necessarily make you feel this way, you still feel like you don't belong. But I feel like with the nature of Hallmark movies, they usually make things a little more obvious, like if his friends were to be rude to her and say, oh, I can't believe you ruined my dress, like, who invited you, sort of thing, it would have created that very obvious divide that they were looking for. It just, like, the way they positioned him makes it seem like he genuinely is interested in her in the beginning. Like, he doesn't scoff at her or belittle her in any way. Overall, I feel like they could have just showed how each scenario would have been fine either way, instead of making her feel guilty for not making it home in that timeline. Because sometimes people don't want to come home for holidays, and it doesn't have to be a sad ordeal. Many people celebrate the holidays with their friends or with families that they've created, and that's completely fine. No one should be made to feel like prioritizing their mental health or physical health in some instances is a bad thing. Just like her friend who goes on vacation in the movie, if you get the time off to enjoy, why not enjoy it how you want? So if you've seen even 2 Hallmark movies, you probably notice how they use a classic story structure. I mentioned earlier that that was one of the main critiques of Hallmark movies, and I understand why. They use the formula of Act 1, you introduce the problem, Act 2, there's a bunch of action, and then 3, the problem is resolved. More specifically, in their Christmas romance movies, the main character has some goal in mind when a love interest enters the scene. Then throughout the middle, they grow closer together. Then at the end, they realize they're in love, and they have to make the leap to tell this person that they love them. This story arc obviously isn't new. This is how most stories work. I mean, if you break up a lot of other romance movies like the Titanic, you'll see it follows the exact same model. But I think what makes Hallmark movies different is the tendency to use specific tropes of the holiday over and over. Tropes like they work in the big city and need a touch of small town family tradition. Or they had a crush when they were young and now fate has brought them back together. Or somehow these 2 butt heads and now they have to work together. The problem is not that they don't subvert expectations and not have the 2 main characters like fall in love. I think the problem is that they make content that's supposed to be mildly entertaining and casual to watch. So the goal isn't necessarily this artistic expression of stories that we've never heard before. It's just to reiterate the things that they've been saying for years. Much like my episode talking about Mean Girls 2, the issues come about when you look at the circumstance under which these movies are being produced. Hallmark aims to put out as many movies as possible every year. It seems they average about 60 movies per year. This includes movies and mysteries, which is slightly different than the regular channel stuff, but it still airs on Hallmark. This means they're averaging almost 5 new movies every month. And to put that into perspective, usually you get maybe 2 or 3 movies from a production company every year, because it takes months and months of planning, and then it takes months and months of filming, and then months and months of editing. So the time constraints under which these producers and their teams are under is insane. I don't even put out 5 videos a month. And I don't even have to gather a bunch of actors or go to different locations, etc. Like, I'm just here in my room. So it's no surprise that when they have this much to produce every year, that they might just keep putting stuff in a hat and throwing darts at the wall. Coming up with 5 original stories for each season and for the related TV shows that they have would be pretty difficult for anyone. I know I couldn't do it. So using a formula like a 3-act play, then adding recognizable scenarios and nostalgic elements from the season, you get a Hallmark movie. If you're looking to watch a movie that has a little more depth, maybe better actors, and interesting imagery, I would suggest something that wasn't made by a greeting card company. Like, legitimately, if you think about it, Hallmark is a greeting card company. Why would you not expect to get a greeting card feel that's very recognizable and somewhat nostalgic when you watch their movies? Movies like The Polar Express, Home Alone, and Elf are all good examples of nostalgic Christmas movies that ask important questions that we all have during this season. The Polar Express is so dreamlike to watch, and it's about learning to believe in something even if you may not have the proof to believe it. Home Alone is fun because there's lots of physical comedy, but it's also about Kevin realizing he needs his family and that his family is what makes Christmas special. And of course, Elf is kind of a combination of both of those movies in that it doesn't want you to let go of the childlike wonder that comes from the holiday season. And while a lot of Hallmark movies probably have those same sentiments, it never feels believable. I think Hallmark is a great example of how companies try to take a neutral stance in order to avoid alienating audiences, but also to avoid criticism when it comes to social issues. The company as a whole has to decide where they're going to lean, and much of that can be influenced by who's in charge. It's easy to see how they've shifted over the years as new presidents come up. I don't doubt they'll continue to do what they're doing by kind of riding the line, but it'll be interesting to watch them in years to come since they've already lost many of their super conservative viewers in recent years. They're also a great example of how something using the classic movie formula, the classic story formula, can actually be to their detriment. But because they're a large corporation, people still tune in, and they'll always make money from the movies they produce no matter how bad they are. And if you're like me and enjoy bad movies, then Hallmark will be on nonstop this Christmas season. I know me and my mom like to sit down every night and be like, okay, what weird title have they come up with to explain exactly what's about to happen in this movie? Granted, my favorite bad Christmas movie is Holiday in Handcuffs with Melissa Joan Hart and Mario Lopez. I know it's ridiculous. It's like an ABC Family movie, but yeah, it's so messed up. Like, she literally kidnaps him in this movie. But if it comes on, you should definitely watch it. And I watch it every year because it gets more and more ridiculous every year that I watch it, but more or less. that's all I have for this episode. It felt like this episode was pretty short, but next week I think we'll have a bit of a longer episode, and also next episode will be the last episode for this season. I'm just doing a pretty short first season because I'm kind of testing the waters, and also because I want to take a short break before I start the new year. I want to kind of catch up on stuff and really get to planning more episodes so you guys can continue to have consistent episodes every week. Anyway, don't forget to follow so you don't miss an episode, and with that, keep watching movies, and I'll see you next week.